He had it all, a billion-dollar tech empire, a penthouse that scraped the New York sky, and his graceful, intelligent wife, Eleonora, who was carrying their first child. He was Julian Croft, a master of the universe. But one sentence from his mistress was all it took to set his perfect world on fire. "It's her or me, Julian," she'd whispered, her voice like velvet and poison. "Kick your pregnant wife out, or the secret that built your empire will be the secret that buries you." He made his choice. And as the heavy oak door clicked shut on Eleonora, her silhouette fragile against the city lights, he knew he hadn't just closed a door. He'd detonated his own life. The city unfolded beneath Julian Croft's penthouse like a circuit board of pulsing light. From the 56th floor of the Orion Tower on Central Park West, Manhattan was his kingdom, a sprawling testament to his ambition. At 34, he possessed the kind of wealth that felt ancient, inherited. But it wasn't. He had clawed his way to the top, building his tech company, Innovate Dynamics, from a garage in Queens into a global behemoth on the back of a revolutionary data encryption algorithm. He was the city's golden boy, his face a familiar sight on the covers of business magazines, his story a modern myth. And at the heart of that myth was Eleonora. Eleonora Croft, née Vance, was not the kind of woman one usually saw on the arm of a new money titan. She was not a model, not an heiress, not a socialite who lived for the flash of paparazzi bulbs. She was an architect, her mind as beautifully structured as the buildings she designed. Her elegance was quiet, her beauty found in the gentle curve of her smile and the intelligent light in her deep-set hazel eyes. She had met Julian not at a gala, but at a dreary city planning commission meeting, where she was passionately defending the preservation of a historic library he had intended to buy and demolish. He'd been so captivated by her fire and conviction that he'd scrapped the project and asked her for dinner instead. Their love story was the bedrock of his public image, the ruthless businessman tamed by the principled artist. And for 5 years, it had been blissfully true. Their home was a sanctuary of glass and steel, softened by Eleonora's touch, shelves overflowing with books, a grand piano in the corner she sometimes played, and walls adorned with architectural sketches instead of ostentatious art. Now, at 7 months pregnant, she was the very picture of serene fulfillment, with the gentle swell of her belly beneath a cashmere dress the promise of their next, most precious joint venture. But for the last 3 months, a hairline crack had appeared in the foundation of their perfect life. It started subtly. Julian, who had always made a point of being home for dinner, began staying late at the office. Finalizing the Axiom deal, he'd say, his voice strained over the phone. Then came the new scent, a cloying, expensive perfume, something floral and audacious, so unlike Eleonora's subtle, woodsy fragrance. It clung to his suits, faint but unmistakable. "You smell like a florist's shop," she'd remarked lightly one evening, trying to keep the tremor of suspicion from her voice as she helped him with his jacket. Julian flinched, a barely perceptible tightening in his shoulders. "Sienna Hayes, from marketing," he'd explained a little too quickly. "She practically bathes in the stuff." We were all crammed in the boardroom for hours. Sienna Hayes. The name was new. Julian's head of marketing was a staid 50-something man named Robert. Did Robert retire? Eleonora asked, smoothing a wrinkle on his lapel, her touch lingering, seeking a connection that felt increasingly frayed. No. Hayes is his new senior VP. A real shark, aggressive. Exactly what we need for the European launch. He turned away, loosening his tie, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional one. God, I'm exhausted. The conversation was over, but Eleonora's unease remained, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She saw the way he now guarded his phone, angling the screen away from her. The device that was once left carelessly on the kitchen counter was now a constant, protected presence in his pocket. She saw the charges on their shared credit card from restaurants she'd never heard of, a jeweler on Fifth Avenue where he hadn't bought her a gift, and a series of late-night Uber rides that didn't end at their building. Her heart ached with a terrible, pressing weight. She was carrying their child, a daughter they had both desperately wanted. They had already designed the nursery, a celestial-themed room painted in shades of midnight blue and silver, a mural of the cosmos painstakingly sketched by Eleonora herself on the main wall. Julian had been so excited, spending a whole weekend assembling a ridiculously complex crib, his usual impatience giving way to a tender focus. Where was that man now? One rainy Tuesday, the lie became undeniable. Julian had called to cancel their dinner plans, their weekly tradition at a quiet Italian restaurant downtown. Buried in quarterly reports, my love. I'll be lucky if I'm home by midnight. Don't wait up. An hour later, her sister Chloe, a razor-sharp litigator with a penchant for brutal honesty, sent her a photo. There was no text, just the image. It was a screenshot from an acquaintance's Instagram story. The photo was candid, blurry, taken from across a crowded, high-end cocktail bar. But the subjects were unmistakable: Julian, leaning in close, a smile on his face she hadn't seen in months, his hand resting familiarly on the arm of a stunning woman with fiery red hair and a dress the color of blood. Her head was tilted back in laughter, her eyes fixed on him with a predatory gleam. The caption read, "Innovate Dynamics CEO Julian Croft and marketing guru Sienna Hayes celebrating the new Axiom partnership. Power couple alert." Eleonora stared at the image, her breath catching in her throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just the lie, it was the casual intimacy, the public nature of it all. He wasn't just cheating, he was building a new life in plain sight. She felt the baby kick, a sudden, sharp reminder of the innocent life caught in the crossfire of this looming disaster. Her first instinct was to shatter something, to scream, to call him and unleash the torrent of pain and betrayal that was flooding her. But her second, stronger instinct took over the architect's instinct to assess the damage, to understand the structural flaws, to find the truth before the entire edifice came crashing down. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the completed nursery, the moonlight casting long shadows across the miniature galaxy on the wall. She ran her hand over the smooth, polished wood of the crib Julian had built. The cold reality was that a stranger named Sienna Hayes had more of her husband than she did. And as she sat there, cloaked in darkness, Eleonora Croft made a decision. She would not be a victim in her own home. She would fight for her marriage, for her family, and for the man she still loved, the man she prayed was simply lost, not gone forever. She just had to find out what, or who, had led him astray. Sienna Hayes operated not with the clumsy tactics of a homewrecker, but with the chilling precision of a corporate strategist. Her affair with Julian was a campaign, and Eleonora was not a rival to be defeated, but a market share to be captured. She had studied Julian for months before making her move, identifying his vulnerabilities as if they were key performance indicators. His primary weakness was a deep-seated insecurity, a fear that despite his billions, he was still the boy from Queens, perpetually afraid of being found out as an imposter among the old-money aristocrats and Ivy League pedigrees. Sienna, with her flawless confidence and cut-glass accent that hinted at a European boarding school education, was his validation. She spoke his language, the ruthless dialect of acquisition and dominance. "Eleonora is your sanctuary," she told him one night, her fingers tracing the lapel of his $1,000 suit as they sat in a private booth at a members-only club. "But a king doesn't live in a sanctuary, Julian. He lives in a fortress. He needs a queen who can stand on the battlements with him, not one who's arranging flowers in the courtyard." She made him feel seen, not for the husband and father-to-be he was becoming, but for the insatiable conqueror he had been. She praised his most ruthless business decisions, ones Eleonora had questioned on moral grounds. She celebrated his extravagances, while Eleonora championed his philanthropy. Sienna was the devil on his shoulder, whispering that greed was good, that his ambition was a virtue, not a sin. The campaign escalated. Sienna began manufacturing professional crises that only Julian could solve. One evening, a frantic call came through just as he and Eleonora were sitting down for a rare, quiet dinner at home. "Julian, thank God," Sienna's voice was a perfect symphony of panic and capability. "The servers in the London office are down. The launch data for the Axiom integration is corrupted. We're talking a potential $100 million loss if we can't restore it before the market opens. London tech is useless. I need you. He was out the door in 5 minutes, leaving Eleonora with a half-hearted apology and a plate of cooling pasta. He spent the entire night at the office with Sienna, the two of them working side by side, fueled by coffee and the electric thrill of the ticking clock. At dawn, they saved the day. The crisis, of course, was entirely fabricated by Sienna's simple server reset she could have ordered with a single email, blown up into a company-defining emergency. When Julian finally came home smelling of stale coffee and Sienna's perfume, he was exhausted but buzzing. You should have seen her, cool as a cucumber. A real killer instinct. Eleonora, who had spent the night sick with worry for both her husband and her marriage, felt a chill. He was admiring the very qualities in Sienna that were antithetical to their life together. He was falling in love with his own reflection in her ambitious eyes. The confrontation came a week later. Eleonora, armed with the Instagram photo and a growing list of suspicious credit card charges, decided she could no longer live with the slow poison of silence. She waited for him in the living room, the city lights twinkling indifferently behind her. She laid the evidence out on the marble coffee table. I know, Julian, she said, her voice quiet but firm, stripped of all accusation, leaving only the raw, painful fact. Julian's reaction was a masterclass in deflection and gaslighting. He didn't erupt in anger. He sighed a deep, weary sigh, as if her discovery were just another burden on his already overloaded shoulders. Eleonora, please, he said, running a hand through his hair. You're pregnant. Your hormones are all over the place. You can't seriously believe this. My hormones aren't creating credit card statements, Julian. They're not taking pictures of you in bars. Sienna is a colleague, he said, his voice rising, taking on a tone of patronizing frustration. A vital part of my company. Are we not allowed to celebrate a business deal? Are you so insecure that I can't have a professional relationship with another woman? Her hand was on your arm. You were looking at her like, she trailed off, unable to voice the devastating comparison. Like you used to look at me. Like what? He pressed, his eyes cold. You're being paranoid. This is exactly why I've been so stressed. I'm trying to close the biggest deal of my life, and I come home to thisto these insane accusations. I thought you, of all people, would be on my side. He turned the tables with brutal efficiency. He was the victim, she, the irrational, hormonal wife. He made her feel small, foolish, and guilty for her own pain. She started to question herself. Was she overreacting? Was she misinterpreting everything? The emotional whiplash was dizzying. He stormed off into their bedroom, slamming the door, leaving her alone in the cavernous living room, the evidence of his betrayal feeling flimsy and absurd under his withering denial. But doubt, once planted, is a hardy weed. The next morning, Julian was overly solicitous, bringing her breakfast in bed, kissing her forehead, telling her he was sorry for being so stressed. It was a performance, and for the first time, Eleonora could see the strings. While he was in the shower, her hands shaking, she did something she had never done before. She took his phone. His password, once their anniversary, had been changed. She tried her birthday. Nothing. On a gut-wrenching hunch, she typed in Sienna's birthday, which she'd found with a quick search of the company's online newsletter. The phone unlocked. Her heart felt like it had turned to lead. The screen opened to his text messages with Sienna. It wasn't just flirtation, it was an entire parallel life. Hundreds of messages filled with private jokes, intimate plans, and scathing remarks about their life together. Julian, stuck in that meeting with the board. Agony. All I can think about is your apartment last night. Sienna, you need to be here. I'm wearing that dress you like. Julian, don't tempt me. Another thrilling evening of prenatal vitamins and nursery rhymes awaits. Sienna, Poor baby. Let me know when you escape the domestic bliss. I'll have a real drink waiting. The most recent message, sent just an hour ago from their very own bed, made her physically sick. Julian, she was asking questions last night. Getting suspicious. Sienna, handle it. Don't let her be a problem, Julian. We're too close to getting everything we want. Everything we want. It wasn't a fling. It was a plan. Eleonora placed the phone back on the nightstand, her movements slow and deliberate, a strange, cold calm settling over her. The man she loved, the father of her child, was a stranger. The betrayal was no longer a crack in the foundation, it was a sinkhole, and it was pulling her under. But as she stood there, with the sound of the shower running in the background, a new feeling began to eclipse the pain, resolve. Her sister Chloe's words echoed in her mind, never let a man make you doubt your own reality. The truth is your weapon. Eleonora walked out of the bedroom, leaving the unlocked phone on the nightstand like a ticking bomb. She now knew the serpent's name. It was time to find out just how venomous its bite was. The next few weeks were a landscape of quiet horror. Julian, believing he had successfully quelled the rebellion, moved through their home with a detached, placid kindness that was more chilling than any argument. He was a ghost in his own life, his body present, but his soul clearly elsewhere. Eleonora, meanwhile, played the part of the placated wife, a role that chafed against her soul. She was now 8 months pregnant, her body heavy and weary, a constant, living reminder of the family Julian was so willing to discard. Every gentle kick from her daughter felt like a tiny accusation, a question she couldn't answer. How could you let this happen? Sienna's campaign entered its final, brutal phase. She was no longer content to be a secret, she wanted to be a successor. She began to subtly insert herself into their lives, a phantom presence designed to unnerve Eleonora. A bouquet of Lily, Sienna's favorite flower, which Eleonora was allergic to, would arrive at the penthouse with a card simply signed, from an admirer. A reservation Eleonora made for their anniversary dinner would be mysteriously cancelled, only for her to find out Julian was attending a last-minute company retreat organized by Sienna. It was psychological warfare designed to make Eleonora feel like a guest in her own life, to wear down her spirit until she simply gave up. But Eleonora did not break. She documented everything. Every text message she managed to see, every suspicious charge, every lie. She and Chloe were building a case, though for what, Eleonora wasn't yet sure. A divorce? A battle for custody? The future felt like a terrifying, formless void. The breaking point arrived on a cold, sleeting Thursday. Julian was in Chicago for a tech conference, so he said. Eleonora was in the nursery, applying the final touches of silver paint to the stars on the ceiling, when the intercom buzzed. It was the front desk. Mrs. Croft, a Miss Sienna Hayes is here to see you. She says it's urgent. Eleonora's blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of it stole her breath. This was a violation of the deepest kind, a predator breaching the final wall of her sanctuary. For a moment, she considered refusing, but a stronger, colder curiosity won out. She wanted to see her enemy, to look into the eyes of the woman who had so masterfully dismantled her life. Send her up, Eleonora said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside her. Sienna Hayes walked into the penthouse as if she owned it. She was even more striking in person than in the blurry photograph. Tall and slender with hair the color of autumn leaves, she wore a sharp, tailored pantsuit that screamed power. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, swept the room with a look of dismissive appraisal, finally landing on Eleonora's swollen belly. A flicker of something contempt, perhaps crossed her face before being replaced by a polished, insincere smile. Eleonora. I'm Sienna. I'm so glad we can finally talk, woman to woman. I doubt there's anything you and I have to talk about, Eleonora replied, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Oh, I think there is, Sienna said, strolling over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, her back to Eleonora. We need to talk about the future. Julian's future. She turned, her smile gone, her expression now one of cold, hard business. You're a lovely woman, Eleonora. Classic, elegant. But you are an anchor on a rocket ship. You are holding him back, tying him to this domestic world when he's meant to conquer the real one. The world you and he conquer in hotel rooms and cocktail bars. Eleonora shot back, her temper flaring. Sienna laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Don't be naive. This was never just about sex. This is about a partnership. I understand his ambition, you fear it. I encourage his ruthlessness, you try to temper it. We are the same. You are his past. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And that's really what I'm here to talk about. The past. She reached into her expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a slim file folder, placing it on the marble coffee table, the same table where Eleonora had confronted Julian weeks before. Julian is a genius, Sienna began. But when he was young, he was also reckless. Before Innovate Dynamics became the giant it is today, it was a struggling startup. And to get his initial seed funding, he had to push out his original partner, a man named Michael Vance. Eleonora froze. Michael Vance was her uncle, her father's estranged younger brother. She hadn't seen him in years, not since a bitter family feud had torn them apart. He was a brilliant but volatile programmer who had struggled with addiction and financial ruin. Your uncle, Sienna continued, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Julian told me the whole story. How Michael was a liability, how he had to be cut loose for the good of the company. A standard, if sad, business story. But Julian, in his haste, left a paper trail. A very, very messy one. Contracts that were backdated. Emails that suggest coercion. It wouldn't just be a civil suit, Eleonora. With the right spin, it could easily look like criminal fraud. She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of documents, emails, and what looked like a signed affidavit from a disgruntled former employee. This, Sienna said, tapping the folder, is the secret that built Julian's empire. The original sin. And I have the original copies. If this were to be leaked to the press or to the SEC, Innovate Dynamics would be crippled overnight. Julian would be ruined, publicly humiliated. He could even face jail time. Eleonora stared at her, her mind reeling. She felt sick. This was the leverage. This was the weapon Sienna had been sharpening all this time. What do you want? Eleonora whispered, though she already knew the answer. Sienna's smile returned, cold and victorious. The choice is very simple. I want you to disappear. You will pack your bags, you will leave this apartment, and you will sign a document stating the separation is mutual and that you waive all future claims to the Croft estate. In return, this folder remains a private matter between me and Julian. She paused, letting the weight of the threat settle. But if you refuse, she went on, her voice like ice, if you fight this, if you try to make a scene or go after him in a divorce, I will burn his kingdom to the ground. And you and your baby will be left with nothing but the ashes. It was the perfect, diabolical trap. To save herself, she would have to destroy Julian. To protect him, she would have to destroy herself. Sienna's final words were the cruelest cut of all. He's on his way back from Chicago now. He'll be here in 2 hours. He is going to ask you to leave. For his sake, and the sake of your child, you need to go without a fight. Let him believe it was his decision. It will be cleaner that way. Don't worry, she added with a smirk. I'll be here to help him pick up the pieces. 2 hours later, Julian walked in. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He couldn't look at her. The words, when they came, were clumsy, rehearsed, and utterly devastating. Eleonora, this isn't working, he stammered, standing by the door like a stranger. We're not happy. I'm not happy. I don't love you anymore. I think the baby was a mistake. Every word was a perfectly calibrated blow, designed to shatter her completely, to make her believe this was about a lack of love, not a hostage negotiation. He walked past her into their bedroom and began pulling her suitcases from the closet. He packed them himself, his movements stiff and robotic, piling in the maternity clothes, the books from her nightstand, the framed photo of their wedding day. Eleonora stood frozen in the living room, Sienna's threat echoing in her ears. She watched as the man she loved methodically erased her from his life. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. He was choosing his empire over his family. He was choosing Sienna over her and their unborn child. When he was done, he dragged the suitcases to the door. He handed her a purse into which he had stuffed a thick wad of cash, a final, insulting severance payment. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the arrangements," he said, his voice flat, his gaze fixed on the wall above her head. He opened the door. The sleet was still coming down, and the wind howled in the hallway. He didn't offer to call her a cab. He didn't ask where she would go. He just stood there, holding the door open, waiting for her to leave. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Eleonora walked past him, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing her tears. As she stepped out into the hallway, the door clicked shut behind her. The sound was finite, absolute. A life, a love, a future, all terminated in a single, metallic click. The moment the door clicked shut, the silence that flooded the penthouse was absolute and terrifying. It wasn't just the absence of Eleonora's soft movements or the low hum of the television she often had on, it was a profound, soul-crushing emptiness. The air, which moments before had been thick with tension and unshed tears, was now thin and sterile. Julian stood with his hand still on the doorknob, his knuckles white. He had done it. He had followed Sienna's script to the letter. He had uttered the cruelest, most unforgivable words. He had packed his pregnant wife's bags and cast her out into the cold. He had saved his empire. So why did he feel like he was dying? His gaze fell upon the indentation on the sofa where Eleonora had been sitting. He saw the book she'd been reading face down on the end table. His eyes drifted towards the hallway that led to the nursery, the galaxy she had painted for their daughter seeming to mock him from the shadows. The baby was a mistake. The words echoed in his head, his own voice a venomous hiss. He felt a wave of nausea so intense he had to grip the doorframe for support. He had expected to feel relief, a grim, necessary relief, the feeling of a surgeon who has just amputated a limb to save a life. Instead, all he felt was a phantom limb pain of the soul, a raw, gaping wound where the best part of himself used to be. The regret was not a slow, dawning realization, it was a physical blow, instant and incapacitating. He had just traded a masterpiece for a forgery, and the scale of his idiotic bargain was crashing down on him all at once. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling, and called Sienna. He needed to hear her voice, to have her reassure him that this agony was a necessary price, that their glorious future was now secure. She answered on the second ring, but her voice was different. The sultry, conspiratorial warmth was gone, replaced by a cool, brisk efficiency. "It's done?" she asked. There was no sympathy, no, "Are you okay?" Just a bottom-line inquiry. "Yes," Julian choked out. "She's gone." "Good," Sienna said. "I'll be over in an hour. We have work to do. I've had my assistant draw up a power of attorney document. We need to start restructuring your personal asset portfolio immediately to shield it from any potential legal blowback. I'll handle everything." There it was. Not, "I'll be there to hold you," but "I'll be there to manage your assets." The seductress was gone, and the corporate raider had taken her place. He was no longer a partner. He was an acquisition. He hung up the phone, a cold dread seeping into his bones, a dread that was even more profound than the grief. He had not been saved. He had just been captured. Eleonora did not go far. She dragged her suitcases down the hallway to the elevator, her body moving on pure, numb autopilot. The tears she had held back now flowed freely, silent streams carving paths down her cold cheeks. The doorman, a kind older man named George who had always treated her with warmth, looked at her with pity and confusion as he hailed her a cab. "Everything all right, Mrs. Croft?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern as he loaded her bags into the trunk. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, a pathetic, jerky motion, and climbed into the back of the taxi. She gave the driver the only address she could think of, her sister's. Chloe Vance lived in a pre-war building in Brooklyn, her apartment a cozy, chaotic space filled with law books and rescue plans. She opened the door and took in the scene, Eleonora, pale and tear-streaked, flanked by a mountain of luggage. Her lawyer's mind immediately assessed the situation as worst-case scenario. Without a word, she pulled her sister into a fierce hug, guiding her inside and kicking the door shut. For the next hour, as Chloe made tea and wrapped a warm blanket around her, Eleonora recounted the entire horrifying story, from Sienna's ultimatum to Julian's cold, scripted dismissal. Chloe listened, her expression growing harder and colder with every word. She wasn't just a sister, she was a fighter, a litigator who smelled weakness and deceit like a shark smells blood in the water. "He said the baby was a mistake?" Chloe asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Eleonora nodded, a fresh wave of sobs shaking her. "No," Chloe said, her eyes narrowing. "No, that's not Julian. That's a man reading a script written by a sociopath. He's weak and he's a coward, but he's not that cruel. He's being threatened. She has evidence, Chloe," Eleonora cried, "about Uncle Michael. She said she could ruin him. Michael Vance." Chloe's eyes lit up with a forensic spark. The family black sheep. The one Dad said was a brilliant coder but couldn't be trusted to water a plant. "The same one," Eleonora whispered. "This story has holes in it, Chloe said, standing up and beginning to pace. "Big ones. Sienna Hayes isn't just a mistress. No one goes to these lengths for an affair. This is personal. This is a targeted attack. The affair was just the infiltration phase." She stopped pacing and looked at her sister, her expression firm. "You are not going to crumble. You are not going to hide. We are not going to let this woman win. You're going to drink this tea, you're going to get some sleep, and in the morning, we start digging. We're going to find out who Sienna Hayes really is." And dig they did. Chloe called in favors from private investigators and paralegals who owed her. They ran deep background checks, searched financial records, and cross-referenced old articles. For 2 days, the sisters worked out of Chloe's apartment, a war room fueled by caffeine and a burning desire for justice. The first breakthrough came from a public records search on Sienna's name. There was no record of a Sienna Hayes attending any of the prestigious European schools she alluded to in her company bio. Her social security number had only been active for the last 5 years. It was as if she had sprung into existence fully formed, with the sole purpose of entering Julian's orbit. The real bombshell came from the private investigator. He had been looking into Michael Vance, trying to trace his whereabouts after he was forced out of the company. He had found him not in disgrace, but living quietly in Oregon, running a small but successful software consultancy firm. The investigator had also unearthed something else. Michael Vance had a daughter. A daughter who had been a teenager when her father lost his company, who had watched her family's life implode. A daughter who, after a messy period in her youth, had legally changed her name 10 years ago. Her birth name was not Sienna Hayes. It was Sienna Vance. Chloe slammed the file down on her dining table. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Eleonora stared at the name, her mind struggling to connect the dots. "Sienna Vance? My cousin?" "Your vengeful, brilliant, and utterly ruthless cousin," Chloe corrected her, her voice a mixture of horror and admiration. "This isn't about business. This isn't about love. This is a blood feud. She's not trying to get Julian, she's trying to annihilate him. And she used you, his biggest vulnerability, to get the access she needed to do it. The truth was more shocking than any simple affair. Eleonora had been a pawn in a long, patient game of revenge. Sienna hadn't just stolen her husband, she had weaponized her entire life against him. And now, holding all the power, she was about to pull the trigger. While Eleonora and Chloe were uncovering the truth, Julian was living through the consequences of his choices. Sienna had moved into the penthouse, but not as a lover. She was an occupying force. The space that had once been a home was now her corporate command center. Her clothes filled Eleonora's side of the closet, her severe modern art replaced Eleonora's architectural sketches, and the grand piano was draped with a dust cover, silenced. Armed with the power of attorney Julian had foolishly signed in a daze of regret and fear, Sienna worked with brutal efficiency. She wasn't just restructuring his assets, she was liquidating them. She sold off his personal stock portfolio, redirecting the funds into accounts he couldn't access. She put his collection of classic cars up for auction. She was systematically dismantling the personal empire he had built, severing him from his own wealth, while leaving the public-facing company, Innovate Dynamics, temporarily untouched. It was a careful, strategic demolition. She was taking everything that was his, leaving him as nothing but a figurehead of a corporation he no longer truly controlled. Julian was a prisoner in his own gilded cage. He confronted her, his voice a mixture of rage and desperation. "What are you doing, Sienna? This isn't what we agreed. You were supposed to protect me." She had looked up from her laptop, her green eyes utterly devoid of the passion they once held. "I am protecting our interests, Julian," she'd said, her voice like chipping ice. "Your personal life was a liability. I'm just cleaning it up. You should be thanking me." He realized then the full extent of his miscalculation. He had handed the keys of the kingdom to his own usurper. The threat of exposing the Michael Vance deal was her permanent leverage, a gun she kept pressed to his head, ensuring his compliance as she bled him dry. He was trapped, humiliated, and utterly alone. He tried calling Eleonora multiple times, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He deserved it. He knew he had thrown her away. He had no right to expect her to save him. Back in Brooklyn, however, a different kind of strategy was forming. Eleonora, galvanized by the revelation of Sienna's true identity, had moved past grief and into a cold, focused anger. This was no longer just about her and Julian, this was about family betrayal and the protection of her unborn child's legacy from a woman consumed by a twisted vendetta. "We can't just expose her for who she is," Chloe argued, pacing her apartment. "It becomes a messy family drama. She'll leak the documents about Michael out of pure spite, and Julian still goes down. We need to neutralize her weapon before we attack her." The key was Michael Vance. Chloe found a number for his consultancy in Oregon and made the call. She explained who she was, who Eleonora was, and what his daughter was doing. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. "I haven't spoken to Sienna in almost a decade," Michael finally said, his voice raspy with emotion. "I knew she was ambitious, but I never thought she held on to that much hate." Chloe pressed him. "The deal, Michael. The one where Julian pushed you out. Sienna is using it as leverage. She's claiming it was fraudulent, coercive." Another pause. "It wasn't," Michael said, surprising them both. "It was brutal, yeah. Julian was a shark. But it wasn't illegal. I was a mess back then, Chloe. A drunk, a liability. I was about to run the company into the ground. Julian's final offer, the one he forced me to sign. It actually saved me. It was more than my share was worth, and it forced me to get clean. He bought me out to save the company, not to steal it." This was the missing piece. The foundation of Sienna's entire scheme was a lie, or at least a malicious twisting of the truth. Did you sign an NDA? Chloe asked, her mind racing. Of course, Michael said. But given what my daughter is doing to my niece, I think I can be persuaded to set the record straight. The plan came together quickly. Michael agreed to fly to New York and sign a new affidavit, one that clarified the context of his departure and exonerated Julian of any criminal wrongdoing. It would turn Sienna's weapon into a dud. The final confrontation was set not in a courtroom, but in the heart of Julian's empire, the main boardroom of Innovate Dynamics. Chloe, acting as Eleonora's legal counsel, requested an emergency meeting with Julian and Sienna to discuss the terms of the separation. Sienna, assuming she held all the cards and eager to finalize her victory, readily agreed. Eleonora walked into that boardroom feeling a strength she had never known. Her pregnancy was no longer a vulnerability, it was her armor. She was fighting for more than just herself, she was fighting for her daughter. Julian was already there, looking like a ghost in his own chair at the head of the table. Sienna sat beside him, radiating smug triumph. Let's make this quick, Sienna said, addressing Chloe. Sign the papers, Eleonora gets her severance, and we can all move on. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Chloe said, placing her briefcase on the table. We're here to discuss a different matter. A matter of fraud, identity theft, and corporate espionage. Sienna's smile flickered. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you? Eleonora said, speaking for the first time, her voice clear and strong. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze holding both sorrow and steel. Julian, the story you told Sienna about my uncle, Michael Vance. You left out the most important part. You didn't just push him out. You saved him from himself. She turned her gaze to Sienna. But you knew that, didn't you, Sienna? Or should I say, Sienna Vance? The name dropped into the silent room like a grenade. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the woman beside him. Sienna's face went white, the mask of cool control shattered, revealing the raw, ugly hatred beneath. He ruined my father, she hissed, her voice shaking with years of pent-up rage. He took everything from us. No, a voice said from the doorway. All heads turned. Standing there was Michael Vance, looking older, weathered, but sober and clear-eyed. He didn't ruin me, sweetheart, Michael said, walking slowly into the room. I almost ruined myself. Julian made a hard choice, and it was the right one. Your whole life has been dedicated to avenging a crime that never happened. Chloe placed Michael's newly signed affidavit on the table. This document clarifies the full context of Mr. Vance's departure from the company. It confirms no fraud took place. We also have records of every asset you've illegally liquidated and a sworn statement from your former assistant about the server crisis you fabricated. It's over, Sienna. Sienna stared at the affidavit, then at her father, then at Julian, her expression a maelstrom of shock and fury. She had lost. Her life's grand project, her intricate revenge, had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. As the full weight of her failure crashed down on her, Eleonora suddenly gasped, her hands flying to her stomach. A sharp, undeniable pain shot through her. She gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table, her knuckles turning white. Chloe, she breathed, her eyes wide with panic. The baby. It's coming. The chaos of the boardroom dissolved into the sterile, focused urgency of a hospital. The high-stakes corporate drama was rendered meaningless by the primal, overwhelming reality of childbirth. Julian, jolted from his stupor by Eleonora's cry of pain, was a mess of frantic, useless energy until Chloe fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. Make yourself useful. Get the car. Now. Sienna Vance simply faded away. Faced with the combined testimony of her father and Chloe's meticulously assembled evidence, she vanished from the boardroom, from the penthouse, from their lives. The legal battle that followed was swift and brutal. She faced multiple charges, and with her father refusing to support her lies, her fall was as spectacular as her ambition had been. The news of the vengeful Vance heiress was a brief, salacious story in the financial papers, a footnote to the drama she had tried to orchestrate. Julian's empire was wounded, but not destroyed. He lost a significant portion of his personal fortune. The cars, the stocks, the cash Sienna had siphoned away. But it was a cleansing fire. As he sat in the stark, uncomfortable waiting room of the maternity ward, the numbers on a screen meant nothing to him. For years, his net worth had been the primary measure of his existence. Now, it felt like monopoly money. The only assets that mattered were in a room down the hall, fighting a battle he had so selfishly complicated. Hours later, a nurse called his name. He walked, legs unsteady, to the nursery viewing window. And there she was, a tiny, perfect infant, swaddled in a pink blanket, her face red and scrunched in sleep. Their daughter. He looked at the name card on the bassinet, Arya Grace Croft. A name Eleonora had chosen. Grace. The one thing he hadn't shown. Through the glass, he could see into Eleonora's room. She was exhausted, pale, but radiant. Chloe was by her side, holding her hand. Michael Vance stood near the door, his expression one of profound, sorrowful regret. He had found his family again in the wreckage his daughter had created. Julian watched them for a long time, an invisible wall of his own making separating him from the scene of love and relief. He had almost lost this. In his foolish, arrogant pursuit of more, he had nearly thrown away everything. He had betrayed the one person who had loved him for who he was, not what he had. The regret was no longer a sharp, instant pain, it was a deep, permanent ache that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. It was a weight he deserved to bear. Finally, he took a breath and pushed the door to her room open. The conversation stopped. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. Michael gave him a slight, complicated nod and quietly led Chloe out of the room, giving them space. He was alone with Eleonora. She looked at him, her hazel eyes holding not hatred, but a profound, heartbreaking weariness. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Yes, she is," Eleonora replied, her voice soft but not weak. He took a hesitant step closer. "Eleonora, there are no words. Sorry is an insult to what I did. I was a coward. I was weak. I let her poison my mind because I was afraid of losing the things that don't matter. And in doing that, I lost the only thing that ever did." He didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just stated the truth, owning the full, catastrophic depth of his failure. Eleonora watched him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't just lie to me, Julian. You believed the lies. You stood there and told me our child was a mistake. It was the cruelest thing I have ever said," he admitted, tears welling in his eyes. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to unsay it with my actions. If you'll let me." He stopped at the foot of her bed, knowing he had no right to come closer. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. And I will understand if you want me gone. I will give you anything, the company, the penthouse, everything. It's all yours. Just please. Let me be a father to her. Let me earn the right to be in her life." He was surrendering everything, not as a bargain, but as penance. For the first time, he was acting not out of fear or ambition, but out of love, a desperate, humble, and unconditional love for the child in the bassinet and the woman in the bed. Eleonora was silent for a long time, the only sound the soft beeping of the hospital machines. The path forward was not clear. A scar had been carved into the heart of their family, and it would never fully disappear. A happily ever after was a fantasy. But as she looked at the broken, humbled man before her, she saw a flicker of the person she had first fallen in love with, the man who, once he recognized his own monumental error, was willing to burn his own world down to make it right. "The first step," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm, "is you find a new place to live. And then, you can come visit her. We'll start there." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it wasn't a dismissal, either. It was a beginning the long, uncertain, and difficult road to redemption. 1 year later, the penthouse was gone, sold to a foreign investor. In a sun-drenched, book-filled apartment in Brooklyn, Eleanora's apartment, a small party was underway. Balloons bobbed at the ceiling. In the center of the room, Julian knelt on the floor, his designer suit replaced by a simple sweater, his face lit with a genuine joy Eleanora hadn't seen in years. He held out a small, soft block to the 1-year-old girl with his eyes and her smile. "Here you go, Arya," he said softly. "Can you show Dada?" Arya giggled and knocked the block tower over. Chloe laughed from the armchair, a protective but softer watchfulness in her eyes. Uncle Michael, a permanent fixture in their new family constellation, was busy taking photos. Julian caught Eleanora's eye from across the room. He didn't offer a grand, apologetic gesture, just a small, quiet smile. A smile that said, "I'm here. I'm doing the work." Eleanora returned it. The scar on her heart remained, a reminder of the collapse. But around it, new life had grown stronger, more honest, more real. The road had been long. It had been filled with therapy, difficult conversations, and Julian proving, day by painstaking day, that he was no longer the master of the universe, but a man dedicated to mastering himself. He was becoming the father his daughter deserved and the partner Eleanora had always hoped for. As Julian looked at his wife and their daughter, the true meaning of wealth finally became clear. It wasn't about the numbers in a bank account. It was about the grueling, day-by-day work of rebuilding trust, of earning grace, of becoming a man worthy of the family he had almost destroyed. He was still on that road, but for the first time in a very long time, he was walking it with them. The collapse was spectacular, but what comes after the fall? True regret is not just a feeling, it's an action. The story of Julian, Eleanora, and Sienna is a raw, gripping reminder that the cost of betrayal is always higher than the price of loyalty, and that true strength is often forged in the fires of the deepest heartbreak. Can a man who has committed the ultimate betrayal ever truly earn his way back? Is forgiveness possible, or are some wounds simply too deep to heal? If their journey of ruin, resilience, and the fragile hope for redemption captivated you, please show your support for stories like this. Hit that like button to let us know you were here. Share this story with someone who loves a drama that feels all too real, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more tales of love, loss, and the long, winding road to redemption. What do you think Eleanora should do next? Let us know in the comments below.